Moshe Rabbeinu goes over 40 days. He gets the entire Torah, and it's a different Torah than we have today. He comes down on the 17th of Tammuz, 40 days later, and he finds that Klal Yisrael has made a terrible miscalculation, a terrible, terrible error. They have built themselves a golden calf. This is quite possibly one of the hardest stories in our history to understand at a certain level. It's one of the hardest stories in the Chumash to understand, you would think. Because you can say, we mentioned last week how when the Jews crossed the Yam Suf just 40 days before, or 42 days before, how they were raised to the level of the highest, of the best of the prophets. Now, 6 weeks later, they're worshiping Avodah Zarah again? What happened? So there's actually a simple answer. There's a simple answer. When people are often lifted to a false level of spirituality, a false level of whatever, and then they're brought back down to reality, that trip from the top back down to the bottom, so to speak, can be so depressing and so damaging that they end up worse than they were in the first place. In other words, but they were lifted to a position beyond themselves. They were not Nevi'im. They were not all Nevi'im, but they were lifted to be Nevi'im for a moment. So that transition back down led to the ability to make mistakes. You know, we see when we get to Rus in a few weeks, how Rus decides to stay with Naomi. Her sister Orpah doesn't. And what does Orpah do that day? She becomes the worst of the worst. Right. So if you remember when Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader, you remember that moment? How a day before he was ready to kill the Emperor, right? Because he figured out the Emperor was a Sith, and he's ready to kill him, right? He's still holding by being a Jedi. He's literally still holding by being a Jedi. And one moment he makes a mistake and he cuts off his hands, and he says, "I'm your man, I'm your slave, I'm your servant, I'm your Talmud," right? And that one, a moment before he was a Jedi. Just because he it's not like he said, okay, I'm not going to be a Jedi, I'm going to be an average Joe. No, he goes to become Darth Vader, the worst of the worst. He went from being the best Jedi to the worst of the worst in a matter of minutes. And the Kuzari speaks out, there's 5 levels of creation. There's a Domem, Tzameach, Chaim, Medaber, and Yisrael. Domem is an inanimate object, like rocks, wood, your desk, that's inanimate, right? It does animate, not animated, it's not alive. Tzameach is plants, live things, right? Animals are number 3. Humans are number 4, so Dom Chai, animals. Medaber means a speaker, a person, because the only thing that distinguishes us from the animals quite often is our ability to speak, and our neshama. Level 4 is a Medaber, a human being, a speaker. Level number 5, Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is the top level of creation in the world. What happens when a plant decides that it no longer wants to be a plant? It becomes essentially a domain, but really it ends up being nothing after a little while because it ends up become part of the soil. What happens to an animal when it dies? Does it become a plant? No, it becomes nothing. It becomes a domain, right? It goes down to the bottom. What happens to a human when it dies? Does it become an animal? No, it becomes nothing. What happens to Klal Yisrael, to a Bnei Yisrael, to a Jew, when they decide they don't want to be a Jew? Do they become a guy? Do they become a non-Jew? No, they become nothing. That's so scary. So that's what happened to Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai. That they were on such a high level, and through whatever, and there's all kinds of midrashim what happened. The Satan tricked them, they miscalculated, whatever it was. But bottom line is that they snapped. They realized that they were artificially brought to a level and they weren't ready for it. So instead of saying, okay, we were brought up to the Memtesh Shari Bina, to the 49th level of understanding, they didn't just go down to level 48. They went back down to 49 in the other direction. So it's a great lesson to us because we work on ourselves all the time. We try to get to high levels. The Mishnah says, don't believe in yourself until the day you die. You always have to work on yourself because quite often when you stop working on yourself, well, the world is an up escalator. Right? You ever try and walk down an up escalator or up on a down escalator? We all try that when we're kids, right? It's really hard.
That's what makes it
so
fun.
The world is a down escalator. We're walking against it. We're swimming upstream in life. If you stop for 1 minute, what happens? You go down. You go the other direction. That's what happened to Klal Yisrael at Chet HaEgel.